She said she would spend only one night with him. No ties, no promises. But that man, silent and wild, carried a darkness that no one dared to touch. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you are listening from. The red wine slid down Leah Moore's glass like liquid blood, reflecting the yellowish lights of the bar in Cambridge. At 37, she had learned to mask the emptiness she carried with intellectual elegance and measured smiles. Her friends talked about failed relationships and life projects while she observed the movement of the place, feeling disconnected from her own existence. "You need to get out more, Lee," said Melissa, her colleague from the literature department. "Since the divorce, you've become a ghost." Leah laughed softly, a humorless sound. Ghost. Perhaps that was the right word. Daughter of a mother who had spent her entire life fighting depression, granddaughter of a man who had disappeared during the dark years of military oppression, she had grown accustomed to absences. Love, in her family, had always been synonymous with loss. "I live," she murmured, swirling the wine in her glass, "just not in the way you expect." That's when she saw him. On the other side of the room, like a shadow that had taken human form, was a man who seemed not to belong to this century. Tall, wearing an impeccable black suit, he observed the environment with the coldness of someone studying prey. There was something predatory in his movements, a dangerous elegance that made Leah's heart accelerate without permission. A thin scar cut the side of his neck, as if someone had tried to silence him forever and failed. His eyes, even at a distance, seemed capable of penetrating not just skin, but soul. When he looked directly at her, Leah felt as if she was being stripped of all the masks she used to survive the world. "Who is that?" she asked Chloe, the most extroverted of the group. "No idea, but he looks like trouble," replied her friend, following Leah's gaze. "The type who collects broken hearts." "Or breaks hearts," added Melissa, laughing. Leah didn't laugh. Something inside her had awakened, a dormant part that recognized in the stranger an echo of herself. It was absurd, but she felt as if she knew him from dreams she didn't remember having. "I'm going to spend a night with him," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Her friends burst into laughter, thinking it was one of the intellectual provocations for which Leah was known. But she wasn't joking. She stood up from the table, ignoring her companion's protests, and walked toward the bar where he waited as if he knew she would come. "How you shouldn't have come," were his first words, spoken with a deep voice that seemed to come from a very profound place. It wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. "Why not?" asked Leah, stopping a few inches from him. She could smell his cologne, a mixture of sandalwood and something she couldn't identify. Danger, perhaps. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. His eyes were such a dark blue they almost reached black, and in them was an ancient sadness, the kind that isn't cured with time. "Because I'm not the type of man women like you should meet. And what type of woman do you think I am?" A smile briefly touched his lips, but didn't reach his eyes. "The type that still believes she can save people." "And do you need to be saved?" "I need to be avoided." But even saying that, he raised his hand and lightly touched her face, a gesture so intimate and unexpected that Leah felt her legs weaken. Her skin burned where he touched as if she was being marked. "Vincent," he said simply. "Vincent Carter." The surname sounded familiar, like a song she knew but couldn't remember from where. Leah Moore, university professor, Gothic literature, specialist in Edgar Allan Poe and authors who write about death as if it were a lover. She stepped back, surprised. "How do you know that?" "I know many things, Leah, and all of them should make you run in the opposite direction." But she didn't run. Instead, she accepted the silent invitation in his eyes and followed him out of the bar, leaving behind her worried friends and the safe life she had built with such care. She didn't yet know that she was walking toward an abyss from which she might never be able to escape. His car was a black Jaguar, as elegant and threatening as its owner. During the journey through the streets of Boston, they barely spoke. Vincent drove with the precision of someone who knew every curve, every shadow of the city, while Leah observed his profile, trying to understand what attracted her so much to him. When they arrived at the mansion in Beacon Hill, Leah understood that she had crossed an invisible line. The house was imposing, full of architectural secrets and an elegance that seemed to come from another century. There, in the silent gardens and shadowy corridors, Vincent kissed her for the first time, a kiss that tasted of perdition and dangerous promises. She knew she should leave. She knew she was getting into something much bigger than she could understand. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, as if she had finally found the character she was destined to play in this life. Vincent's mansion was a labyrinth of memories and silences. Leah woke the next morning in white silk sheets, her body still vibrating from the sensations of the previous night. He was no longer there, but she could feel his presence in the way the furniture seemed to await his return, in the way the light filtered through the heavy curtains as if asking permission to enter. She put on his shirt, which smelled of sandalwood and mystery, and descended the marble stairs. The house was even more impressive in daylight, full of antiques that seemed to whisper stories she didn't understand. Family portraits with severe faces observed her from the corridors, and she had the strange sensation that she had walked there before. Vincent found her in the library, an immense room with shelves that rose to the ceiling and a fireplace lit even in the February heat. He wore only white linen pants and held a cup of coffee, looking more human in the morning light but no less dangerous. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said, but his voice carried no reproach. It was just an observation, like someone who looks at the sky and announces it's going to rain. "You didn't ask me to leave. I never ask for anything, Leah. I only warn." She approached him, fascinated by how his presence altered the air around them. "And what are you warning me about now?" Vincent placed the cup on an antique table and pulled her to him, in a movement so sudden that she lost her breath. His hands were firm, possessive, as if they had known her for years. "That if you stay, you'll have to accept my rules." "What rules?" "Don't ask about my wife, don't enter the east wing of the house, and never try to open the door on the top floor." His eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "Never, Leah. Can you accept that?" She should have asked why. She should have demanded explanations, but there was something in the way he touched her, in the way he pronounced her name, that disarmed all her rationality. It was as if he knew a version of her that she didn't even know existed. "For now," she answered, and saw a dangerous smile touch his lips. The days that followed were a sentimental education that Leah had never imagined possible. Vincent courted her with a silent intensity, like a predator who wasn't in a hurry, but knew exactly where he wanted to go. He would appear at her university without warning, waiting for her in the parking lot with black flowers that seemed to come from funerals. He would send cars to pick her up for dinners in restaurants, where they were the only customers, as if he had bought the entire night just for them. "You're scaring my friends," she said one afternoon, as they walked through the mansion's gardens. "They think you're married." "I'm a widower," replied Vincent, and for the first time his voice carried something beyond control. A small, almost imperceptible crack. "How did she die?" He stopped walking and looked at her with an expression that froze her blood. "That's one of the questions you can't ask." Leah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the way he said it, a pain so deep it seemed physical. But there was also something more, guilt. "Vincent, no." He pulled her against him, kissing her with a hunger that tasted of desperation. "Don't ask about things you can't undo." That night, he loved her with an intensity that bordered on violence, as if he were trying to erase something through her body. Leah surrendered completely, feeling more alive than she had ever been, but also more lost. It was as if she were drowning in deep waters, and at the same time finally learning to breathe. But the signs were all there, if she had paid attention. The way he watched her sleep, as if memorizing every detail. The nightmares that woke him up screaming names she didn't recognize. The way he avoided certain parts of the house, always walking through the same corridors as if following an invisible map. And there were the objects, small things that she gradually noticed: a woman's class ring on the bedroom dresser, a French perfume in the bathroom that was clearly not for her. Photographs turned face down on every table in the house. Vincent lived surrounded by the ghosts of a previous life, and Leah began to suspect that perhaps she was just another spectre in his collection. The first real crack in her fantasy happened on a rainy Thursday. Vincent had gone out to take care of business, and she was alone in the library when she found a book of Latin poetry that had belonged to her grandmother. She recognized the delicate handwriting in the margin, the notes her grandmother made when she was young. How had that book ended up there? When she confronted Vincent that night, he was silent for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My family and yours have a history," he finally said. A history that perhaps is better not to unearth. What kind of history? The kind that kills people, Leah. The kind that should have died with those who lived it. But it was too late to turn back. She was already deeply involved, not just with Vincent, but with the mysteries he carried. And she began to suspect that perhaps it wasn't a coincidence they had met in that bar, on that specific night. Perhaps nothing in her life had been a coincidence since she had crossed the threshold of that mansion. 3 weeks after the meeting at the bar, Leah had become a stranger to herself. She cancelled classes to spend entire afternoons at the mansion, ignored calls from her friends, and lived in a kind of trance that oscillated between ecstasy and restlessness. Vincent consumed her in a way she didn't know was possible, as if each kiss were a small death and each caress a rebirth. But the questions multiplied like shadows. Why did he never take her to meet friends? Why did all the employees of the house treat her with a strange reverence, as if she were an apparition they had been expecting for a long time? And mainly, why did she have the persistent impression that she already knew these corridors, these gardens, as if they were part of old dreams? "You're different," said Melissa, intercepting her at the university exit. "Thin, pale, with dark circles. This man is bad for you. He's good for me," retorted Leah, but her own voice sounded strange, distant. "For the first time in my life I feel truly alive." "Alive? You look haunted." Perhaps Melissa was right. Leah was beginning to have strange dreams, visions of a dark-haired woman running through corridors in flames, screaming a name that she couldn't understand upon waking. She always woke up sweating, with the taste of smoke in her mouth, as if she had really been in the fire. That night, she decided to confront Vincent about the dreams. She found him in the study, a somber room on the ground floor of the mansion, surrounded by law and economics books. He was on the phone, speaking in Spanish with someone about business that involved astronomical amounts and deadlines that couldn't be missed. When he saw her, he abruptly ended the call. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but he didn't seem irritated. "Just tired, as if carrying secrets were a physical weight." "I'm having strange dreams," said Leah, sitting in the leather armchair in front of his desk. "Dreams with fires, with a woman screaming." Vincent's face closed like a door slamming. For a moment she was afraid he would expel her right there. Instead, he stood up and served 2 glasses of whiskey, extending one to her. "Drink." "Vincent, I need to know." "You need to forget." His voice had become dangerous. "Some dreams are just echoes of things better left dead." "Echoes of what?" He drank the whiskey in one gulp and looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Of my wife, Eleanor. She died in a fire 6 years ago." "In the house?" "In the room on the top floor. The room you can't enter." Leah felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. "How was the fire?" "Electrical," they said. "Old wires, an old house." "But I know it wasn't that." He approached her, his eyes carrying a pain that seemed infinite. "I know because I was there when it happened." You saw her die?" Vincent was silent for so long that Leah thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a whisper. "I have sleep disorders, Leah, parasomnias. Sometimes I wake up in places I don't remember going to, doing things I don't remember doing. That night I woke up in the hallway with the smell of smoke, and she was—" He closed his eyes as if the image was physical pain. "She was screaming my name, but I couldn't move. It was as if I were trapped in a nightmare." "My God, Vincent, the investigators filed the case as an accident, but I know it was my fault. Somehow I caused it. And now you're having the same dreams that I've had every night for 6 years. Leah stood up and went to him, touching his face with a tenderness that surprised them both. "You're not to blame for accidents, Vincent. Sometimes things simply happen. You don't understand." He held her hands, squeezing them tightly. "Eleanor was just like you. Same height, same physical type, same way of tilting your head when you think. That's why I couldn't resist when I saw you in that bar. It was as if she had come back to give me a second chance to destroy everything." Leah's heart raced. "Just like how?" "As if you were the same person born twice." This revelation should have made her run. It should have scared her enough to leave that house and never return. Instead, she felt strangely attracted to this impossible coincidence. It was as if she had finally found the explanation for the familiarity she felt in that house, for the sensation of living a life that wasn't hers. "Show me a picture of her," she asked. "No." "Vincent?" "No," he repeated more firmly. Some things are better kept hidden. But Leah had decided she wouldn't live in the dark anymore. If she was falling in love with a man haunted by the ghosts of the past, she needed to know these ghosts. She needed to understand what role she was being called to play in this family tragedy that seemed to repeat itself through generations. That night, as Vincent slept beside her, she heard the screams for the first time. They weren't her dreams. They were his. He screamed her name, Eleanor, with an agony that cut through the early hours like a blade. And amid the screams, she heard something that made her sit up in bed with her heart racing. He had also screamed her name, Leah. As if both, the dead and the living, were part of the same infinite nightmare that pursued him every night. When he finally woke up, his eyes were full of tears, and for the first time she saw the man behind the mask of control. A lost man haunted, carrying guilt that perhaps wasn't his, but that completely defined him. "I dreamed you were burning," he said, still trembling. "That I was losing you again." Leah's obsession with discovering the truth about Eleanor grew like a disease. During the day she pretended normalcy, gave her classes on Gothic literature with the irony of living her own dark story. But every night while Vincent worked or slept, she explored the mansion like an amateur detective, looking for clues about the woman who had died there. It was on one of these nocturnal incursions that she found the first real clue. In the library, leafing through an old copy of 100 Years of Solitude, a yellowed paper slipped from the pages. It was a letter, written in a feminine and delicate handwriting. "My dear Vincent, I know you fight against your demons every night, but I need you to understand. I'm not afraid of what you might do while sleeping. I'm afraid of what you won't do while awake. The love I feel for you is stronger than any nightmare, Eleanor." Leah read the letter several times, trying to decipher between the lines. What demons were these? And why did Eleanor seem to accept with such naturalness something that clearly terrified her? She kept the letter and continued her search. On the 3rd floor, she discovered that several doors were locked, not just the one on the top floor. When she questioned Vincent about this, he answered with the usual evasiveness. "They're just empty rooms, nothing you need to see." But Leah had learned to read the nuances in his voice. He was lying, and that hurt her more than any truth could hurt. The discovery that changed everything happened on a Thursday afternoon, when Vincent left for a business meeting in downtown Boston. Leah was alone, exploring a wing of the house she rarely visited, when she found a door ajar that had always been closed. She couldn't resist. The room was a sanctuary, furniture covered with white sheets, portraits turned to the wall, and in the center of it all, an immaculately made bed, as if someone were going to sleep there that night. But it was the back wall that made her stagger. Dozens of photographs of Eleanor covered the surface from top to bottom, and looking at them, Leah understood why Vincent had been so disturbed when he saw her in that bar. The resemblance wasn't just physical, it was frightening. Same almond-shaped eyes, same slightly crooked smile, same way of holding her head. It was as if she were looking at versions of herself that she had never known existed. But there was something more disturbing than the photographs. On the nightstand beside the bed, she found a diary bound in red leather. The first pages were written by Eleanor herself, telling about her relationship with Vincent, her fears, her dreams. But the final pages were different. The handwriting was Vincent's, and the dates were all after his wife's death. Eleanor came back today. She was at the cafe where we used to go, wearing the blue dress she loved so much. I tried to approach her, but she disappeared into the crowd. I know I'm going crazy, but I can't stop looking for her. I saw Eleanor again, this time at the university. She was teaching, talking about Edgar Allan Poe, as if she herself were one of his dark characters. I followed her to the parking lot, but when I called her name, she looked at me as if I were a stranger. She said her name was Leah. Leah's heart stopped. He had been following her long before that night at the bar. He had been observing her, studying her, perhaps even orchestrating the meeting she had thought was a coincidence. She continued reading, each word like a stab. Leah accepted my invitation. She's here at home now, sleeping in the same room where Eleanor died. Sometimes when the light hits at a certain angle, they are indistinguishable. Did Eleanor send her to me? Is this my chance to fix everything I did wrong? I can't tell Leah the truth. I can't tell her that I chose her because she's identical to the woman I killed. She deserves more than being the substitute for a ghost. But I can't let her go, not again. killed. The word echoed in Leah's mind like a gunshot. Vincent had admitted in the diary that he had killed Eleanor. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a sleep disorder. It had been murder. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, looking for more details, for an explanation that made sense of the horror she was discovering. And she found it. The investigators don't know about the letters, about the threats that Eleanor had been receiving. Someone knew about our involvement with my grandfather's business during the political oppression, knew about the dirty money that built our empire. Eleanor discovered who it was going to denounce everything. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her destroy everything my family had fought for. But when I saw the flames taking over the room, when I heard her screams, I knew I had become the monster I had always feared being. The sleep disorders are real, but that night I was awake. I was lucid, and I chose to let her die. Leah closed the diary, feeling physically sick. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who made her feel alive for the first time, was a murderer. And she wasn't his new chance at love. She was his new victim. She ran to the room they shared, grabbed her things with trembling hands, and headed for the door. But Vincent was there, leaning against the doorframe, watching her with a calmness that was more terrifying than any explosion of anger. "You read the diary," he said. It wasn't a question. "You killed her," replied Leah, her voice little more than a whisper. "You killed Eleanor, and now you want to kill me too." "No," said Vincent, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "I want you to save me." "From what?" "From myself, from everything I am, from everything I've done." He approached slowly, as if dealing with an injured animal. "Eleanor was going to turn me into the police. She was going to destroy not just me, but hundreds of families who depend on the Carter companies. I had to choose. You chose to kill the woman you loved. I chose poorly, and since then I've been living in the hell I created. You think I don't know that I chose you because you're like her. You think I don't know how sick that is." His eyes were full of tears, but his voice remained controlled. "But you chose me too, Leah. Even knowing I was dangerous, even feeling there was something wrong, why?" It was a good question. Why had she felt attracted to him from the first moment? Why had each warning he gave only made her want to stay closer? "Because you make me feel as if I'm finally living my true life," she admitted, hating herself for this honesty. "Then you understand. We are both broken people, looking for pieces of ourselves in each other." He touched her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the horrible confession he had just made. "Stay with me, Leah. Help me be a better man than I was." She should have said no. She should have run out and never looked back. Never. Instead, she allowed him to kiss her, allowed him to take her back to bed, allowed him to make her temporarily forget the monster he was, because perhaps she was a bit monstrous too, and perhaps monsters deserved a second chance at love. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the diary, Leah lived in a kind of emotional limbo. She knew she should leave, that staying was accepting being an accomplice to a horrible crime. But there was something about Vincent that kept her bound, as if they were two pieces of a macabre puzzle that only made sense when fitted together. He had changed after the confession. He was kinder, more attentive, as if being exposed in his monstrosity had freed him to be vulnerable. He brought her coffee in bed, read poetry aloud on rainy afternoons, touched her face as if she were made of glass and could break at any moment. It was a desperate courtesy, of a man who knew he was living his last moments of happiness. "You're going to leave me," he said one March morning, as he watched Leah get dressed. It wasn't a question. It was a painful certainty. "I haven't decided yet." "You have decided. You're just trying to find the courage." Perhaps he was right. Leah felt like an actress playing a role for which she hadn't prepared. During the day, at the university, she pretended normalcy. But at night, in the arms of a murderer, she discovered layers of herself that she didn't know existed. It was both fascinating and terrifying. It was while looking for a way to understand herself that she decided to visit her mother in Worcester. It had been months since she'd seen her, and perhaps the woman who had raised her had answers to questions that Leah couldn't even formulate. The house where she grew up seemed smaller, sadder. Her mother, at 65, carried depression like a cloak she had never managed to remove. But when Leah mentioned the name Carter, something changed in her expression. An old visceral fear. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, abruptly putting down the teacup she was holding. "I met a man, Vincent Carter." "Mom, What happened? You've gone white. Leah's mother got up and went to an old dresser, from which she removed a shoebox yellowed by time. Inside were photographs, letters, documents that Leah had never seen. Your grandmother never told you the truth about what happened to your grandfather, she said, her voice carrying a deep sadness. She said he had simply disappeared during the political oppression, that we never knew what happened to him. And that's not what happened. That is what happened, but we knew who was responsible. She extended an old photograph to Leah. Do you recognize this man? The photo showed an elegant man, in a suit and tie, next to a military officer. Leah studied the face and felt a chill. The features were unmistakably familiar, an older version of the eyes she knew so well. It's Vincent's grandfather, she said, without knowing how she was so certain. Augustus Carter. He financed paramilitary operations during the political oppression. Your grandfather discovered it, was going to denounce it. A week later, he disappeared. We never found the body. Leah sat down heavily, trying to process the information. Mom, are you sure about this? Your grandmother spent years investigating, gathered evidence, testimonies, but never managed to do anything. The Carters were too powerful, too protected. She died carrying that frustration. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because we thought the past was buried, that our family could finally live in peace. Leah's mother held her hands, her eyes full of tears. What kind of man is this, Vincent? Why are you involved with him? Leah didn't know what to answer. How could she explain that she was in love with the grandson of the man who had probably ordered her grandfather's death? How could she admit that this didn't make her want to love him less, but in an even more desperate way? She returned to Boston that same night, carrying the box of photographs and documents. She found Vincent in the library, reading a book about American history. When he saw her, he smiled, but the smile disappeared when he saw the expression on her face. You discovered, he said simply. About our grandfathers? Yes. She dumped the contents of the box on the table. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? Vincent observed the scattered photographs, gently touching one that showed Leah's grandfather with his family. I knew our pasts were connected. I didn't know the details. Lie. It's the truth. He stood up and went to a bookshelf from which he removed a thick folder. But after we met, I had everything investigated. I wanted to understand why I felt so attracted to you from the first moment. He opened the folder, revealing dozens of documents, photographs, certificates. It was a complete dossier on Leah's family, going back several generations. Discover what I discovered, he said, handing her a specific document. Your grandmother and my grandfather were lovers. Leah read the document, a private investigation report. Her grandmother, before getting married, had been Augustus Carter's lover for almost 2 years. The relationship ended when she discovered his activities during the political oppression. That's why she knew so much about his business, murmured Leah. She was trying to get revenge for a love gone wrong. And our grandfathers passed that destructive passion on to us, said Vincent, approaching. We're condemned to repeat their mistakes, Leah. To love who we shouldn't love, to hurt who we love most. We're not our grandfathers, aren't we? Then why can't you leave me, even knowing I'm a murderer? Why can't I let you go, even knowing I'll end up destroying you? It was a cruel question because it was true. Leah felt trapped in a web of obsession that went beyond reason, beyond morality. It was as if she and Vincent were characters in a tragedy that had begun decades before they were born. Maybe we can break the cycle, she said, but her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. Or maybe we're destined to end as they ended, with blood and guilt. Vincent touched her face and she couldn't pull away. Do you still love me, even knowing everything? I hate you for making me love you, she answered, and it was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of desperation and condemnation, and Leah knew that no matter how many horrible truths she discovered, no matter how many crimes Vincent had committed, she was bound to him in a way that transcended choice. They were two ghosts dancing on the tombs of their ancestors, repeating steps of a waltz they had never learned to dance alone. The discovery about their grandfathers changed everything between Leah and Vincent, but not in the way she expected. Instead of pushing them apart, the revelation brought them even closer, as if they had finally found an explanation for the magnetic and destructive attraction they felt for each other. It was comforting and terrifying to know they weren't the first in their families to lose themselves in this kind of impossible love. But the questions continued to multiply. If Vincent knew about the family connection, why had he chosen precisely her? If he knew she was the granddaughter of the woman who had almost destroyed his grandfather, why didn't he see her as a threat? The answer came on an April morning, when Leah woke up alone in the mansion. Vincent had traveled to New York City to take care of business, leaving her with total freedom for the first time since they had met. It was the perfect opportunity to explore the last mystery of the house, the locked room on the top floor. She found the key hidden in Vincent's study, inside a copy of The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. The irony didn't go unnoticed. He had hidden the darkest secret of the house inside a book about obsession and death. The staircase that led to the top floor was different from the rest of the mansion. Narrower, darker, as if it led not just to another room, but to another world. When she finally opened the door, Leah had to lean on the doorframe to avoid staggering. The room was exactly as Eleanor had left it on the night of her death. The unmade bed, books scattered on the nightstand, clothes thrown over an armchair. But it wasn't these details that shocked her. It was the back wall, covered from floor to ceiling with photographs of Leah, hundreds of them, some taken from a distance, when she left the university or walked through the streets of Boston, others closer, as if someone had been just a few meters from her without her noticing. And in the center of all of them, a huge enlargement of a photo of her laughing, with a date that made her freeze. 3 years before meeting Vincent. He had been watching her for 3 years. But there was more. On an antique table, she found piles of handwritten notes, details about her routine, her habits, her preferences. Vincent knew she drank coffee without sugar, that she had the habit of biting her lower lip when she was nervous, that she always took the same bus to return from the university. He knew her better than she knew herself, and there were the dresses. An entire wardrobe full of clothes she had never seen, but that were exactly her size, exactly her style. As if Vincent had created an idealized version of her long before they met in person. At the back of the wardrobe, she found something that made her sit on the floor, trembling. An unfinished oil painting showing her lying in bed, sleeping. The technique was exquisite, each detail captured with an obsessive precision, but the date in the corner of the canvas indicated it had been painted 2 years before they met. How was this possible? It was then that she saw the easel in the corner of the room, with another canvas. This one showed Leah and Vincent together, in an intimate scene that she recognized as being from the previous week. But it wasn't that which disturbed her. It was the fact that in the painting, Vincent watched her sleep with an expression she had never seen on his face. Pure, predatory satisfaction. Her hands trembled when she found the diaries hidden in a secret drawer of the table. It wasn't just one diary. There were dozens dated over 3 years, meticulously documenting every aspect of her life. I found her today, Leah Moore, professor of Gothic literature. She was giving a lecture on Edgar Allan Poe, and when she laughed at a joke she made about death and obsession, I knew I had found my new Eleanor. She's almost physically identical, but there's something more. A familiar darkness, a melancholy I recognize. She will be perfect. I followed Leah to her house today. She lives alone, as I expected. Women like her always live alone. They're too proud to accept company, too traumatized to trust anyone completely. It will be easy to make her fall in love with me. Leah has nightmares. She screams during the night. And when I wake up startled, for a moment I believe it's Eleanor coming back to haunt me. The resemblance is disturbing, but it's exactly what I need. A second chance to do things right. Leah stopped reading, feeling physically sick. Vincent hadn't fallen in love with her. He had become obsessed with her as a substitute for Eleanor, meticulously planning to seduce her, manipulate her, perhaps even kill her when he tired of the game. But it was the last diary, the most recent, that completely broke her. Leah discovered about Eleanor, but she's still here. This confirms my theory. Some women are attracted to darkness, even when they know it can destroy them. Eleanor was like that. Leah is too. They want to be saved, but they also want to be consumed. It's a delicious contradiction. She found the information about our grandfathers. I saw the anger in her eyes, but also the desire. We're addicted to each other the same way they were. The difference is that I learned from my grandfather's mistakes. He let Leah's grandmother escape. I won't make the same mistake. Leah will never leave this house. Not because I won't let her, but because she won't want to leave. She's become addicted to the intensity of what we have, to the sensation of finally living a great passion. When she realizes she's a prisoner, It will be too late. She will have already become part of the house, part of me, part of the ghosts that inhabit these walls. Leah closed the diary, tears streaming down her face. Everything had been manipulation from the beginning. The meeting at the bar, the overwhelming passion, even the gradual revelation of secrets. Everything had been carefully orchestrated to make her fall in love with a ghost. It was then that she heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Vincent had returned from his trip. She quickly hid the diaries and stood up, trying to appear casual. When he appeared at the door, he smiled as if he had found exactly what he expected. "You opened the door," he said, without surprise or anger. "I was wondering how long it would take." "Vincent, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything." He entered the room, closing the door behind him. "You saw everything, didn't you? The photographs, the diaries, the paintings. Now you know the truth. The truth is that you're a psychopath. That you followed me, studied me, manipulated me so I would fall in love with you. The truth," said Vincent, approaching slowly, "is that you needed me as much as I needed you. The truth is that you've never been more alive than in the last few months. The truth is that, even knowing all this, you still love me." Leah wanted to deny, wanted to scream that he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down she knew he was right. Even discovering the extent of his manipulation, even understanding that she had been treated like a doll in a dollhouse, she still felt her heart race with his proximity. "You're sick," she murmured. "We both are," replied Vincent, touching her face with the same tenderness as always. "The difference is that I accept my sickness, and you're beginning to accept yours." He was right, and that terrified her more than any threat of violence. After the discovery in the room on the top floor, something broke irreparably inside Leah. It wasn't just the betrayal of manipulation. It wasn't just the fear of being in love with a man who had hunted her like a predator. It was the terrible realization that Vincent was right. She had become addicted to the intensity of that sick love. And even knowing everything, she still couldn't leave. She spent 3 days pretending normalcy, behaving as if she hadn't discovered anything. Vincent also pretended, but sometimes she caught him watching her with a satisfaction he no longer tried to hide. It was as if they were interpreting the final acts of a play that both knew how would end. It was Melissa who saved her from emotional paralysis. She appeared at the university one Thursday afternoon, worried because Leah had missed 3 consecutive classes without notice. "You look like a walking corpse," said Melissa, forcing Leah to sit in a cafe near campus. "What the hell is happening to you?" Leah wanted to tell everything, but how to explain that she was living a gothic nightmare that surpassed any literature she had ever studied? How to say she had fallen in love with a murderer who had chosen her because she looked like the woman he had killed? "I'm having problems," she finally said. "Serious problems with Vincent. That sinister man, I knew it. From the first day I knew he was going to destroy you." Melissa held her hands, frightened by how cold they were. "Leah, you need to get away from him, now. It's not that simple." "Why not? You pack your things and leave. Simple as that." If it were simple, she would have already done it. But there was something about Vincent that held her in an almost supernatural way, as if he had found a secret part of her soul and was holding it hostage. "He knows me better than I know myself," she admitted. "It's as if he had a key to parts of me that I didn't even know existed. That's called psychological manipulation, Leah, and it's exactly how dangerous men control their victims." Melissa leaned forward, her voice becoming urgent. "You need to leave Boston. Go far away, where he can't find you." The idea of leaving Boston, leaving Vincent, should have brought relief. Instead, it provoked a physical anxiety that made her feel as if she were drowning. It was as if her entire identity had become dependent on that toxic relationship. But Melissa didn't give up. That same night, she appeared at the mansion with a suitcase and iron determination. "We're leaving now," she said, when Leah opened the door. "My cousin has an inn in Newport. We can stay there until you recover." Vincent appeared behind Leah, and Melissa instinctively stepped back. There was something about him that activated primitive survival alarms, a danger that was felt on the skin before being understood by the mind. "Your friend is worried about you," said Vincent, his voice polite but carrying a subtle threat. "Perhaps you should listen to what she has to say." "Leah, for God's sake, let's go," whispered Melissa. "This man is dangerous." It was then that Vincent did something Leah didn't expect. He smiled genuinely, almost with relief. "She's right, Leah. You should go." "What?" "You should go with your friend. Leave Boston. Forget me. Rebuild your life far from here." He approached, touching her face with the tenderness she knew so well. "Because if you stay, I don't know if I'll be able to resist the temptation to keep you here forever." It was the first time Vincent had openly admitted his intentions, and paradoxically, this brutal honesty was what finally broke the spell he had cast over her. Leah packed that same night, while Vincent silently watched from the doorway. He didn't try to stop her, didn't beg her to stay. He just observed, as if memorizing every movement so he could remember later. "You'll come looking for me," he said when she finished. "I won't." "Yes, you will. In a few months, when normal life begins to seem too bland, when you remember how alive you felt here, you'll come back." "You're wrong. I hope so." He approached for the last time, kissing her with a desperate passion. "But if you come back, Leah, I won't let you leave again." Leah left the mansion that night, carrying only a suitcase and the weight of a love she knew would destroy her if she allowed it to fully blossom. Melissa drove in silence through the streets of Boston, respecting the pain that radiated from her friend like heat. Newport was everything Boston wasn't. Small, tranquil, full of colonial history and tourists seeking peace. Leah rented a room in an inn near the historic center and tried to rebuild a routine that made sense without Vincent. During the first weeks, it was like going through withdrawal syndrome. She woke up looking for him in bed, expected to hear his voice in the corridors, missed even the tense silences that filled the mansion. It was as if she had left a vital part of herself behind. But gradually, she began to remember who she was before meeting him. She returned to writing, small texts about literature that she sent to academic journals. She walked on the beaches early in the morning, rediscovered the pleasure of reading without looking for clues about her own life in the pages. It was on one of these morning walks, 2 weeks after her arrival in Newport, that she met the journalist. Carlos Martinez was a correspondent for a major Boston newspaper in the city doing a story on historical tourism. But when he learned she was from Boston and had met the Carter family, his interest completely changed focus. "Can I talk to you about Vincent Carter?" he asked, approaching her one morning as she drank coffee in the central square. Leah almost choked. "Why do you want to know about him?" "I'm investigating his wife's death. Eleanor Carter. There are inconsistencies in the police report that were never clarified." Leah's heart raced. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Carlos sat at her table, lowering his voice. Eleanor Carter was being threatened in the weeks preceding her death. She received anonymous letters, had her car vandalized, even hired a private detective to investigate who was stalking her. And what did the detective discover? That someone from her family was involved in dirty business related to the period of political oppression, someone who had a lot to lose if she decided to talk. Leah felt as if the world had tilted. Someone from her family. A cousin, Robert Moore. He laundered money for military personnel during the 70s using shell companies. Eleanor discovered it by chance when she was researching her own family's history for a book she was writing. Moore. The same surname as Leah. The same family. "Carlos," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to know everything about Robert Moore. Everything." This is how Leah discovered that the truth was even more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. And that perhaps Vincent wasn't the only monster in this story. Robert Moore was a shadow that Leah knew only from whispered conversations at family gatherings. Her mother's older cousin, who had made a fortune during the political oppression, and then disappeared from family life as if he had never existed. Whenever someone mentioned his name, the adults changed the subject, as if talking about him was an invitation to bad luck. Carlos Martinez had a thick dossier on Robert, photographs, banking documents obtained illegally, testimonies from people who preferred not to be identified. The man who emerged from these pages was an unscrupulous businessman who had profited enormously from political repression, offering cleaning services to military personnel who needed to make evidence of torture and murder disappear. "Robert Moore wasn't just a collaborator," explained Carlos as they leafed through the documents on the inn's porch. "He was what they called a facilitator. He provided false identities for torturers who needed to disappear, handled dirty money, eliminated problematic witnesses." "Eliminate how?" "How do you think?" Carlos lit a cigarette, his hands trembling slightly. "We're talking about someone who had a private security company that was, in practice, a death squad." Leah felt nauseous. "And Eleanor discovered this?" Eleanor was writing a book about women who lost husbands during the political oppression, interviewing widows, researching archived cases. That's how she stumbled upon the connection between Robert Moore and some disappearances, including your grandfather's. The world seemed to stop. "My grandfather was killed by Robert." "Not directly, but Robert was the one who facilitated the disappearance, who erased the tracks, who ensured the body was never found." Carlos showed a grainy photo of a man in a suit entering a government building. "Robert is still alive, Leah. Lives in Stowe, Vermont, in an isolated mansion. Changed his name, created a new identity, but it's him." The information hit Leah like a punch in the stomach. Robert wasn't just a distant relative with a dark past. He was her grandfather's murderer, the man who had destroyed her family decades before she was born. "Was Eleanor going to denounce him?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She was going to publish everything in the book. Names, dates, documents. Robert found out and began threatening her. When he realized she wasn't going to give up, he had her killed. That's what I believe. The fire in the Carter mansion wasn't an accident, but it also wasn't Vincent who caused it. It was professional sabotage made to look accidental. Leah was silent for a long time, processing the implications. Vincent had carried the guilt for Eleanor's death for 6 years, believing his sleep disorders had transformed him into a murderer. Meanwhile, the true culprit lived freely in Stowe, Vermont. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because I believe Robert knows about you. Knows you're involved with Vincent, knows you might discover the truth just as Eleanor discovered." Carlos looked at her gravely. "You're in danger, Leah. Just as much as Eleanor was." As if his words had invoked the threat, Leah's phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Boston area code. "Hello?" "Leah." The voice was male, harsh with a heavy Boston accent. "My name is Robert. I think we need to talk." Her blood froze. "How did you get my number?" "Getting information has been my specialty for 40 years, dear, just as making people disappear when they become problematic." The threat in the voice was subtle but unmistakable. "I heard you're asking questions about matters that are none of your business." Carlos gestured frantically, indicating she should keep talking so he could record the conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Leah, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course you do. I also heard you got involved with the Carter grandson. What a romantic story, isn't it? The granddaughter of the grandfather's lover repeating the mistakes of the past." Robert laughed, a humorless sound. "But unlike your grandmother, you won't have the chance to grow old carrying resentment." "You killed Eleanor?" "Eleanor was a romantic, just like you. She believed that truth liberates, that justice always prevails." "Nonsense from someone who never understood how the world really works." The voice became colder. "You have 24 hours to return to Boston. I want to talk in person. And if I don't go, then I'll come to you. And believe me, it's better if our conversation happens in neutral territory." The call ended, leaving Leah trembling. Carlos immediately grabbed his laptop and began making some calls, organizing protection for her. But Leah knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Robert Moore had killed dozens of people during the political oppression and had continued killing when necessary. He wouldn't give up easily. "I need to tell Vincent," she said. "Leah, no. You finally managed to get away from him. He needs to know he didn't kill Eleanor. He needs to know the truth." Carlos sighed. "And then? You go back to him. Back to that life as a gilded prisoner." It was a valid question. Leah still loved Vincent. That hadn't changed. But now she understood that their love had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Vincent had chosen her because she looked like Eleanor, had orchestrated their meeting, had manipulated her emotions with the precision of a psychologist. Even if he wasn't a murderer, he was still a dangerous manipulator. But there was something beyond love that pulled her back to Boston. It was the need for justice, for truth, to finally break the cycle of violence that had destroyed 2 generations of their families. "I'm not going back to him," she finally said. "But I am going back to Boston. Robert wants a conversation? Then let's talk." "Are you crazy?" "Maybe, but I'm tired of running, tired of living in fear, tired of letting powerful men control my life." She stood up, feeling a determination she hadn't experienced in months. "Eleanor died because she discovered the truth and tried to reveal it alone. I'm not going to make the same mistake. What are you going to do? I'm going to expose Robert Moore. I'm going to tell the whole story. About Eleanor, about my grandfather, about 40 years of crimes that went unpunished. But first, I'm going to talk to Vincent. He deserves to know the truth. Carlos shook his head, but began organizing the documents she would take back to Boston. You know you're walking straight into a trap, don't you? I know, but sometimes the only way out is through the trap, not away from it. Leah spent the rest of the afternoon making copies of Carlos's documents, writing a letter detailing everything she had discovered and sending it to Melissa with instructions to deliver it to the police if something happened to her. It was a precaution, but she knew it would probably be useless. Robert had survived 40 years eliminating people who threatened him. He wouldn't be easily defeated by a university professor haunted by her own family. But she had to try. For Eleanor, for her grandfather, for Vincent, and for herself. The journey back to Boston was a journey through ghosts. Leah watched the familiar landscape through the bus window, knowing that perhaps it was the last time she would see those mountains, those small towns that dotted the way between Newport and the capital. Robert Moore wasn't a man to make empty threats, and she was consciously walking toward a meeting that could end with her death. But first, she needed to see Vincent. The mansion in Beacon Hill seemed different when she arrived, at the end of a rainy Friday afternoon. The windows were closed, the gardens poorly maintained, as if the house had begun to die in her absence. The electric gate opened before she even touched the intercom, as if Vincent had been waiting for her. He was in the library, sitting in the same armchair where she had found him so many times, but he was different. Thinner, with deep dark circles, unshaven. He looked like a man who had given up pretending he was alive. "You came back," he said, without surprise in his voice, just an infinite sadness. "Not in the way you think." Vincent stood up, approaching with the caution of someone approaching a wounded animal. "I knew you were in Newport. I also knew you were talking to journalists. How did you know? I have people who inform me about you, Leah. Even after you left, I couldn't stop protecting you." She should have been irritated by this, but instead felt a deep melancholy. Vincent continued to be the obsessive man who had hunted her for 3 years, but there was something different in the way he looked at her, a resignation that didn't exist before. "Vincent, I need to tell you something about Eleanor." "You don't need to. I know." "You know what?" He went to the desk and picked up a thick folder, identical to the one Carlos had shown. "I learned about Robert Moore, learned that it was he who killed Eleanor, learned that you discovered the whole truth." Leah was astonished. "How? You think I'm the only one with resources to investigate the past? When you left, when I realized I might lose you forever, I decided to discover the whole truth. About Eleanor, about our families, about everything." He opened the folder, showing documents, photographs, maps. "Robert Moore has a house in Stowe, Vermont. He also has an isolated property near the Canadian border. That's where he took your grandfather before killing him." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Robert called me too. He wants me to hand you over to him in exchange for silence about my family's crimes during the political oppression." Vincent looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that seemed physical. "And because I need you to know that this time I'm going to make the right choice." Leah felt her heart race. "What choice?" "The same one my grandfather should have made with your grandmother. The same one I should have made with Eleanor." He approached, touching her face with a tenderness she had forgotten how much it hurt. "I'm going to help you destroy Robert Moore, and then I'm going to let you go." "Vincent? No." He interrupted her with a soft kiss, full of farewell. "Don't try to convince me otherwise. I love you, Leah. I love you in a sick, obsessive, destructive way. But for the first time in my life, I'm going to love you enough to free you from me." The tears she had been holding back since Newport finally came, because she recognized in those words the man she had fallen in love with, beneath all the layers of manipulation and obsession. Vincent had always been capable of true love. The problem was that he didn't know how to express it in a healthy way. "How are we going to stop Robert?" "He wants to meet you tomorrow night at a property of his in Concord. Isolated place, no witnesses." Vincent showed a map marked with various routes. "He doesn't expect me to appear. He doesn't expect you to be armed with all the truth about his crimes. And if it's a trap, it is a trap. But sometimes the only way out of a trap is to go through it completely. They spent the rest of the night planning. Vincent had hired a private detective to investigate Robert, discovering not just his past crimes, but also current criminal activities. The man continued laundering money, now for drug cartels, using a network of shell companies spread across 3 states. "He's not just going to try to kill you," explained Vincent. "He's going to try to make you completely disappear, as he did with your grandfather. But this time we'll be prepared." Carlos arrived the next morning, bringing more evidence and a microscopic digital recorder. The plan was simple. Leah would go to the meeting, record Robert's confession, and Vincent would intervene before he could hurt her. It was risky, but it was the only way to get enough evidence to arrest a man who had bought his impunity decades ago. The property in Concord was an isolated country house, surrounded by acres of dense forest. Leah arrived at the scheduled time, at 8 in the evening, driving the car Vincent had lent her. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, but her determination was iron. Robert Moore was a man in his 60s, grey hair, distinguished appearance. He looked more like a retired businessman than a professional assassin, but his eyes had the coldness of someone who had taken many lives without losing sleep. "Leah," he said, opening the door with a fake smile. "Good that you came. Come in, we have a lot to talk about." The house was sparsely furnished, functional. There were no personal photographs, valuable objects, nothing that could identify who really lived there. It was a place made to leave no traces. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Something stronger?" "I'd prefer we get straight to the point." Robert laughed, a humorless sound. "Direct like your grandmother." She also didn't like beating around the bush. "You knew her." "I knew her very well. Beautiful woman, idealistic, in love with the wrong man." He served himself a whiskey, not offering anything to her. "Pity she didn't know when to stop asking questions. It was you who killed my grandfather." "I didn't kill anyone, dear. I merely facilitate disappearances when necessary." Robert sat in a leather armchair, studying her with clinical interest. "Your grandfather discovered things that could harm very important people. He needed to be silenced." "And Eleanor? She also needed to be silenced?" "Eleanor was a dreamer like you. She believed she could change the world by publishing inconvenient truths." He drank the whiskey slowly, savoring both the drink and the confession. The fire was artistically executed. It looked so accidental. The recorder hidden in her purse was capturing every word. But Leah needed more details, more specific confessions. "How did you know Eleanor was investigating?" "I have informants in all the places that matter. Newspapers, publishers, universities. I knew about her book before she even finished writing the first chapter." Robert stood up, walking to the window. "Pity you inherited the family stubbornness. You could have lived a long and happy life if you hadn't started asking the same questions that killed Eleanor." "Are you going to kill me?" "I won't dirty my hands personally. I have people for that." He made a gesture, and 2 men entered through the back door. "But first, I need to know what you've already discovered, who you've talked to, what evidence you've gathered." It was then that the lights went out. The darkness lasted only seconds, but it was enough for the world to transform into chaos. Leah heard screams, the sound of furniture being knocked over, then a shot that echoed through the house like thunder. When the emergency lights came on, Vincent was standing at the entrance to the room holding a gun, while Robert's 2 men lay on the floor, motionless. Robert had hidden behind the sofa, but his hands trembled as he held a pistol pointed at Leah. "Carter," he said, his voice losing all its previous calm, "I should have known you would appear." "Put down the gun, Robert," replied Vincent, keeping his aim steady. "It's over. We have everything recorded. We have all the evidence. The police are already on their way." "You think the police are going to arrest someone of my position? I bought judges when you were still in diapers." "Times have changed, and I've changed too." Vincent took a step forward, protecting Leah with his body. "I'm not going to repeat my family's mistakes. I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else." Robert laughed, a hysterical sound. "How touching. The little Carter grandson turning hero. But you forget one thing, Vincent. I know all your secrets too. I know how you manipulated this girl. I know about the sick obsession you have for her. I know that you're as much a monster as I am." "He's right," said Leah, surprising them both. "Vincent is a monster. He manipulated my feelings, followed me for years, treated me as a substitute for a dead woman." Vincent looked at her, pain and confusion in his eyes. "Leah, but the difference between you two," she continued, slowly walking away from the line of fire, is that Vincent is a monster who learned to love, and you're just a monster. It was the distraction Vincent needed. In a quick movement, he shot Robert's hand, making him drop the gun. The man fell to the floor, screaming in pain as Vincent completely disarmed him. "The police arrive in 5 minutes," said Vincent, handcuffing Robert with handcuffs he had brought. "Carlos is bringing all the evidence you gathered." Sirens could already be heard in the distance. Leah sat in a chair, trembling for the first time since she had arrived there. It was surreal that everything had ended so abruptly, that decades of crimes and secrets had been exposed in a single night. "Why did you come?" she asked Vincent. "You could have let me handle it alone." "Because despite everything I did wrong, I love you. And I wasn't going to let you die for my family's crimes." He knelt beside her chair, touching her hand carefully. "But now you're free. From Robert, from me, from all the ghosts that haunted us. And you, what are you going to do?" Vincent smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I'm going to turn myself in to the police. I need to answer for the crimes I committed, for the people I hurt by financing illegal operations of the company. It's time to break the cycle." "Vincent, no, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." He kissed her hand, a gesture of farewell. "It's the only way to redeem myself, the only way to prove that you taught me to be a better man." The police arrived minutes later, arresting Robert and collecting all the evidence. Carlos had brought journalists, ensuring the story would be widely publicized, that this time there would be no cover-up or bribes to prevent justice. Vincent turned himself in voluntarily, confessing his participation in money laundering and bribery schemes. His company would be investigated, his assets confiscated, his life of privilege destroyed. But for the first time in years, he seemed at peace with himself. "Will you wait for me?" he asked Leah as he was taken away by the police. She was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I don't know who I'll be when all this is over." "Then be who you always were before you met me. Be the brilliant professor, the strong woman, the person who falls in love with literature because she understands that even in the darkest stories, there can be redemption." These were the last words they exchanged that night. The months that followed were a whirlwind of trials, testimonies, news articles. The story of Robert Moore and his crimes during the political oppression shocked the country, reopening wounds that many thought had healed. Families of political disappeared finally had answers. Bodies were found and buried with dignity. Vincent was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but his collaboration with justice and Leah's testimony about how he had risked his life to save her ensured he would serve only 2 years in a minimum security facility. Leah returned to Worcester, took care of her mother, who finally had peace knowing the truth about her father's disappearance. She wrote a book about the entire experience, an account that mixed personal memory with historical analysis of the crimes of political oppression. The book became a bestseller, not for the sensation, but for the honest way she narrated her own journey through darkness. It was on an October afternoon, almost 3 years after the beginning of everything, that Vincent appeared at the university where she had returned to teach. He was different, thinner, with grey hair at the temples, but his eyes had a serenity she had never seen. "You're back," she said, finding him in the parking lot after a class on Edgar Allan Poe. "I got out of prison 2 weeks ago. I wanted to see how you were." They walked through the campus in silence, two strangers who had shared the deepest possible intimacy between two people. Leah felt strangely nervous, as if she were meeting Vincent for the first time. "I read your book," he finally said. "You were very generous to me. I wrote the truth. You did terrible things, but in the end you made the right choice. And now, can you forgive me?" Leah stopped walking, studying his face. "I forgave you a long time ago, Vincent. The question is, can you forgive yourself?" "I'm learning. Therapy in prison taught me a lot about myself, about the origins of my obsession, about how to transform sick love into healthy love." "And what did you discover?" Vincent smiled, a true smile. "That truly loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even if it's far from you. It means respecting their choices, supporting their dreams, celebrating their achievements without trying to control them. That's very different from the man I met." "Because I am very different from the man you met. Prison, therapy, losing everything I thought defined me, taught me who I really am when I stopped trying to control the world around me." They reached the end of the campus, where the cars were parked. It was time to say goodbye again, but this time without pain, without desperation. "Leah," said Vincent, "I know I don't have the right to ask this after everything I did, but would you give me a second chance? A real chance this time, without manipulation, without obsession. Just two people trying to build something healthy together." She studied him for a long moment. The man before her still had the same eyes that had fascinated her that first night at the bar, but now they reflected an honesty that didn't exist before. There was suffering in him, but also growth. There was remorse, but also hope. "A second chance," she finally said, "would mean starting from zero. It would mean you would have to win me over again, the right way this time. No tricks, no psychological games, no trying to control my life." "I would love to try," replied Vincent, extending his hand to her. "May I invite you for coffee? Like two strangers who just met." Leah smiled, feeling for the first time in years that she was exactly where she should be, making exactly the right choice. "I would love to accept." And when their hands touched, it was different from all the other times. There was no possessiveness, no desperation, no sensation of being consumed by something greater than herself. It was just the touch of two people who had gone through hell together and finally learned to love each other in a healthy way. They walked together toward the nearest cafe, two survivors of their own dark stories, finally ready to write a new chapter, this time together but free.